2020 was a pretty terrible year, and that's excluding COVID. It seems like race relations in America were at their worst, especially in an election year, and it seems like they were at their worst, at least in my lifetime of a 24-year-old. I want to know what's going on and where are we going, because it is a very serious situation when you have two groups of people, two groups of races that seemingly are so divided that they're different tribes, different countries entirely. So with that said, welcome to Cancel This. I'm your host, Angelo Isidoro, and today we're going to be speaking to best-selling author Shelby Steele. Shelby is a senior at the Hoover Institute. He's also a documentarian. He created a documentary with his son called What Killed Michael Brown. It's really good. It's on Amazon. And he is someone who has lived through the civil rights era. He was a young, civil rights radical. And now he has this commentary on Black Lives Matter and what is going on in America that I feel is really valuable and I would like to share with you. So with that said, please listen and let me know your thoughts. So, as you know, race relations and the topic of race in America is really prominent at the moment, as it seemingly always has been. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's going on currently with the Black Lives Matter movement, with your documentary that you're releasing with your son. But first, I was hoping if I could just get a bit of a background on you and your life and where you were brought up and how you became involved with civil rights.
Okay, I'll give you a sketch, I guess. Otherwise, we'd be here all day and people would go to sleep.
Yeah, the footnotes version.
Yeah. No, my parents met each other and married in the very early civil rights movement in Chicago in the 1940s. And so they were activists before I was born. And I grew up, they were founding members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, which is probably the organization that most defined the civil rights movement, that merged the battle against segregation with the Gandhian struggle against colonialism. So they were philosophically, spiritually, and otherwise very much involved in that. That's the world I was born into. And throughout my childhood, they created the first racially integrated church in Chicago. Still there. They made sure that the schools that we went to were segregated. I went to an all-black school. Next to us was an all-white school in the same school district. They organized a boycott, closed it down for a year, changed the teachers, the superintendent. So that I again grew up where there was this sense of engagement as a moral engagement in transforming society beyond racism. And so that was my youth. In college, in the 60s, I was a leader of the Black, I suppose, Black militant struggle is the best way to put it. Stokely Carmichael, Eldridge Cleaver, a long list of people, and I was sort of a part of that. And our great distinction was that we were tired of the pacifism of the earlier civil rights movement. We wanted an activism. We were militant. We were militaristic in our thinking and in our approach. We demanded that America. We didn't ask America to give up segregation. We demanded it on pain of violence. And there was this move away from passive resistance to violent confrontation in the 60s, and went on for a period of 5, 6, 7 years or more. There's still some remnants of it around today. I became, though I led the student march into the president of the university's office and all that sort of thing. As I got involved in the world, I taught in the inner city for a number of years. Uh, I sort of grew up, became initiated, and um, saw the futility of this militant approach, and I began to question uh, the whole civil rights involvement within American life, and to try to understand it in a new way. And so that sort of began my career as someone who wrote it would write about it, use writing to explore this complicated American reality of race.
Well, and the reason why I ask is because I want to make a note to listeners that you're not exactly agnostic when it comes to your own activism as a young man. I mean, you've been through all of this, and that's why I think your commentary on what is going on in America is really interesting to me, especially as a Canadian who, we're just looking over the fence trying to understand what's going on. Um, I want to ask you a little bit about America today in the sense that I'm 24, so I don't have too much of a life experience to understand what racism, what I'm, you know, there's a narrative that exists that racism is at its worst, that there is systemic racism, that there's police brutality and things are at the worst position they've ever been. I'm wondering if you could, explain really the psychology behind the Black Lives Matter movement and what exactly is going on. I'm asking that purely as someone who's just looking over the fence, trying to understand why this conflict exists when it seems very clear to me that there are equal rights and everyone just seems to treat people like people. Why have things gotten so bad?
That's a great question. I've written a little bit on that. I intend to write more on it. The elephant in the room, as I like to say, the elephant in the room in American race relations is the fact that we as Black Americans are not very much victimized by it because of our race anymore. We don't have the problems that people had when I was growing up in segregated America, and every single aspect of your life was determined by your race. Whether we could only swim in the public pool on Thursday nights after 7 o'clock, and the rest of the time we'd have to sit and watch the white kids play. Everything was that was the way of the world. Well, the formal legal oppression of Black people is over with. So what is Black Lives Matter all about? What are they struck? One of the things that I think came that sits upon this problem that this generation of young Black Americans has today uh, is the fact that the Black identity is victim focused. It's focused in protest against racial victimization. But here we are in 2020, and there's not much racial persecution around. You got to look pretty hard to find it. What you do find are racial preferences that offer Blacks all sorts of preferential treatment and advantages. Uh, you don't find open racist. There's not even very many racist fringe groups. So how if your identity is focused, the true Black is the Black who's a victim and fighting against that victimization, and yet there's not much victimization. What do you do? This, it seems to me, is the true dilemma of young Blacks today, millennial and so forth, of that age group. They're to be they want to identify with their people. They want to take a strong, uncompromising position, but there's really no victimization there to it's that battle has been fought. I was again, I'm old enough to have been a part of it and remember it. And it was a profound struggle. It was a heroic, It was one of the greatest moments in human history, the moral overcoming. Well, there's today that just isn't necessary anymore. There's nobody seriously arguing for racism and segregation again, except people on the political left who want to use it now as a preference to use race as a preference to help minorities and so forth. They're still sort of devoted to race, but the rest of the world is giving that up. Well, that's the dilemma I think that young people face. And so since we don't have enough racism, what do? We invent it. We say, oh, you can't see it, it's not obvious, but it is systemic. It's structural. It's an inherent bias. You can't see it, but believe us, it's really there. And George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and all of the prove the fact that racism is systemic. Well, if you only need Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and a few others to prove that it's systemic, what about the 3,000 black youth that were shot 2 years ago in Chicago, one city, 500 and some killed, dead, and no particular comment, not from the president on down. Well, again, the contradiction is such with Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and so forth. The finger that pulled the trigger was white. They were black. We had an instance. This is victimization, and victimization is black power. We blacks live in a society that's guilty about what it did to us in the past. And that guilt, our ability to manipulate that guilt, is black power today. And so we are going to put on an identity, pretend that we're still persecuted by race. And we're going to come up with words like systemic racism to sort of to fill in that, make it look like, oh my God, racism is around every corner and so forth, and I can be triggered, and I need a safe space, and all this sort of convoluted, self-indulgent political approach. So it just sort of proves my point that there's not enough racism for us to really define ourselves against anymore. We now face freedom. Freedom is the biggest problem Black America has, not racism. Racism is diminished to nothing. Freedom is the problem. Can we compete with everybody else now on a free playing field across the modern world? Are we ready for that? Have we taken on that as our Black challenge? To me, I would like the center of the Black identity to shift away from the idea of ourselves as victims to the idea of ourselves as free people, which we now are. And I speak as someone who was born into a world where I was not a free person, and my father before me, and so forth. Today, my children, my grandchildren are free people. They simply are. There's nothing they can do about it. It's the state of affairs in the world. It's a beautiful thing. But freedom is terrifying because suddenly you are responsible for your own life. You're responsible for making something of it. The fact of your color is not going to help you or hurt you. It doesn't make you a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman or a professor or whatever. You have to do that on your own, and you have to go through much easier to say there's systemic racism everywhere, and I'm oppressed, and therefore give me reparations, give me racial preferences to universities, to American institutions, give me diversity programs, give me inclusion, give me on and on, things that again, we've gotten all those things for the last 60 years. And today, with all those social programs, $22 trillion worth of social programs, we are farther behind whites than we were in 1950s when we got absolutely nothing. but disregard and real persecution. We were closer by every socioeconomic measure to whites then than we are now. In 1950s, black students graduated from American universities with slightly higher grade point averages than white students. They had a lower dropout rate. Today, after 60 years of social programs directed to black students have the lowest grade point average, the highest dropout rate of any student group in America. That right there is our challenge now. If you want to be black, let's redefine blackness as people who tackle freedom, make a life for themselves in the freedom that they have, who cherish that freedom, who identify with the society they live in rather than against it, who raise their children with pride, not just to be black, but to be American, to be a part of a society that fought against its worst inner demons and has gone a long way toward conquering them. That kind of black identity, it seems to me, is where we ought to be going at this point if we want to if we want to progress, if we want to make progress.
Yes, and it is, a frightening temptation, as you put it, where there are individuals, I imagine, and this could be human nature to some degree, where there's a temptation to sort of take what you can get. If maybe you're not good at studying, or you're just mediocre. I would imagine that there is just an individual temptation there, but I also wonder, something that's worried me that I've noticed is the fact that these great ideas that existed even in the civil rights movement, the idea that you should judge people based on the content of their character, that you shouldn't see people as differently based on their race or anything, you should just treat everyone like a human being. Even that is actually sort of attacked now. Like I've noticed, although radical Black Lives Matter activists say, no, you should see us differently. No, we should have, segregated schools where you have days, one university in Washington, for example, the students created a day where only black students are allowed to go, the white students aren't allowed inside. That sort of precedent, which people like you and in your generation fought so hard to put an end to, it seems like there's a voluntary interest to bring back that segregation. Is that victimhood? Is that what's fueling that?
Absolutely. Uh, as I've written, race
Wow.
is always a means to power. It's never anything else. Anytime anybody ever picks up race and uses it to explain something or justify something, it's a means to power. And it breaks my heart to see young people, the age of people in Black Lives Matter, pick up race. The thing that the concept that oppressed us for 4 centuries, and use it to try to now say that, well, race is important, race is some sort of atavistic, marvelous, all-defining thing. And well, of course, what they're doing is the same thing the segregationists. The segregationist says race is the exact same thing. Race is atavistic, it's a truth, it's a collect, blah, 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 because he then used it to segregate people and to steal their lives from them. Well, when Black Lives Matter says no, race is important, we need university preferences and so on. They're doing exactly. They're just like the segregationists. They are using it for power. They're using it in a way is that is absolutely always. There's never any variance here. Race always leads to corruption. There has to be a corruption. If I'm going to use my race and ask for a job or some special consideration, then I'm asking you to bend the rules. I'm asking you to exclude people who are not of my race. I'm asking you to dehumanize people, to get those people who are not of my race out of the way. so that I might prevail. So I'm a racist. If you pick up race, you're a racist. You cannot, we ought to have not learned by now that this is something we can't, that is always evil. It never is for the good. It never serves the good, ever. And it breaks my heart to see a new young generation of Black Americans come along and fall for that. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know what the level of involvement of this generation is. I'm sure many Blacks today don't buy this at all. Don't buy into this idea of race, and it's just that Black Lives Matter get all this attention, and so it's sort of pushed on blacks whether they want it or not.
Yeah, and you know, the other side of it that is concerning as well is the fact that a lot of white people of my generation, you know, early 20s, whatever age they may be, have bought into the narrative of identity politics that all you are is your race. So as a white person, you know, I'm Greek, so I don't know where I fit in. I'm ambiguous, but most people I know uh, believe and buy into this idea that, well, even if you say you're not racist as a white person, you have implicit racism because of your privilege and your place in society. So you have to pay or be an ally. Like there's nothing you can do um, to prove you're not racist, as Robin DiAngelo says in White Fragility. Even if you try, you can't do anything. So it sort of puts everyone into this guilt stage. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that side of it, where you have Black Lives Matter, you have young Black people getting involved with that, but then you also have this sort of white guilt uh, that exists in America. And, you know, the fact of the matter is there was slavery, there is a history there, right? But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, civil rights was really the sort of end to that chapter, unless I'm completely wrong here.
Well, yes, I wrote a book on white guilt. I think white guilt is the number one race problem we have in America. If there's one place that it springs from at this point, it is white guilt. And by white guilt, I don't mean an actual feeling of guilt. I don't think whites feel an actual feeling of guilt. White guilt is the terror, and it is literally a terror of being seen as racist, and therefore scurrying and running to sort of try to find ways to prove that you're not racist. And we blacks then, of course, say, make whites feel guilty because then they're desperate and vulnerable and we can make them believe all sorts of things. Black Lives Matter exists for white people, not for black people. Many black people do not take what Black Lives Matter seriously at all. Whites take Black lives seriously and say, "Oh my God, these poor people," and buy into the victim-focused Black identity. So there is this symbiotic relationship between blacks and whites, and of course, white America is extremely wealthy. There are all sorts of benefits they can give out, and they do. And so black power, black manipulation of white guilt is rewarded. Uh, Whites turn over their institute. You see corporate America now, they can't wait to have diversity programs and inclusion programs. They can't, they're gonna make sure they prove their innocence of racism by using racism. That it's part of the irony. They use race to show us the evil of racism. Uh, but white guilt is as I've written, white guilt is black power. Black power is white guilt. They are exactly the same thing, and it is this right now, this relationship between agitated black students and white middle class women living in the suburbs who want to put up Black Lives Matter signs, lawn signs in their front yard, to to say I'm innocent, I'm not a racist. Well, as long as blacks feel they've got you on the hook, So you got to put up a lawn sign, and then they feel as though that's real power, and they're seen in the world. They're not invisibilized. They're seen, and so it's again a symbiotic sort of corruption that we are visited we struggle with and waste time on today when it's not the issue. What is the issue? The issue is the almost complete collapse of the black family. There's a black underclass today. When I was growing up, we got no programs, nothing. We got brutality and segregation, and we were farther ahead than blacks are today. There was not really a black underclass. There were poor blacks, but they were all working. Families were more intact. There were fathers in the home. We were moving up slowly but surely in American life. Now we stopped. We've got a huge, ever expanding underclass. 75, 80% of black children are born without a father. What sort of social program is that? You can have all of the safe space arguments you want. When you've got 75% of your group with no being born without unstable families, without fathers, that becomes a profound human difficulty to surmount. But that's what I would love to see the younger generation focus on. That's what's got us. That's what's holding us back now, not white racism.
Hmm. Well, I want to ask you on the future then. I mean, as young people, we're going into 2021 now. There's going to be a new president, but I think this election was interesting in the fact that a higher percentage of black voters, comparatively to other Republican candidates, voted for Trump. There seems to be some kind of movement going on. I wonder, what are your thoughts on what the future looks like, as well as what we, as white people or black people, Americans, individuals, what we all need to do to come together and recognize each other, as human beings, and just live life and move up and have some kind of positive symbiotic relationship. I just want to know your thoughts on what the future looks like and what we should do.
Well, again, in terms of what the civil rights movement fought for, we're in the future. Again, we're the really untold story is the vast amount of moral progress America has made since the 1960s, since the civil rights movement. That's the untold story. I know what whites back in that day, they thought of segregation as simply God's law. They didn't feel guilty about it, or it's God's law. Well, we've grown so far from that now, and nobody wants to argue that anymore. So that's been achieved. Where we need to go from here, it seems to me, is the area of development. We need to develop the skills, the levels of knowledge, of sophistication. We've got to join modernity, the modern world, and find a way to thrive in that world. We have to adapt now. After 4 centuries of oppression, we have the challenge of adapting. It's not easy, but that is what our challenge is. We can get all the white guilt money we want, but if we are not teaching our child, to read and write before they go to school, we're not putting them in competition with other children who are learning all of those things and who are going to thrive in this modern world. And if our kids are not doing that, then there's no hope. So the future, it seems to me, is I would like the young people in Black Lives Matter to simply wake up, simply sit down for a minute and think about this, where you're at in this world, and all of the rich opportunities open to you, open to Black Americans, to do all sorts of things that were never there before. They are there now. And your challenge is to stand up to the almost snowstorm of opportunity and possibility that is coming your way. If we can make that shift and give up this idea that we have to make white people be ashamed of victimizing us, and that's our way into the future. That we already did that as Black people. We won that battle long time ago. I made the number was probably 1968, 1970. The argument was made. We were on a new path. So please, we have to make our future individual by individual. Your contribution to Blackness, if you will, is that you have made yourself into a doctor, or that you have made yourself into a businessman, or you have achieved something else, an artist, whatever it is that suits you as an individual. You are, as Ralph Ellison said, the group is the sum of its individuals. The goal is not to create the uncreated conscience of your race, but to create the uncreated features of your face. Become an individual. If I have anything that is I've struggled for in life, the only reason I'm sitting here in this chair now is because I realized at a certain point, going through all Black militancy and everything, I realized you have to become you. It's me. It's up to me. You have to make a life. There's no way to avoid that challenge. The sooner we get there, the sooner we accept that challenge, accept our fate, accept that we're free, better off we will be.
I think that's a good positive note to leave it on. But before we go, you and your son have created a documentary on Michael Brown, and it is my understanding that it is available on Amazon, but it was taken down because they like to censor people. But it is back up now. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. They called and said that they realized they had made a mistake. They put it back up. So, power to them. It's disappointing that they would have ever taken it down in the first place, but they made good and put it back up. So yes, it is now available. It's also available at whatkilledmichaelbrown.com. As
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to link it everywhere. I highly recommend it to people. It's really, really fantastic. And it's good to see a father and son working together that way. It's really interesting. So yeah, Shelby, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was a big honor.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And hope I didn't preach too much.
No, it was all good. I loved it.
Thank you.
That was the best-selling author Shelby Steele. He is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, and he is also a documentarian with his son Eli. They created a documentary called What Killed Michael Brown, as he mentioned. It's available on Amazon and on their website, whatkilledmichaelbrown.com. That was a really valuable discussion for me. I learned a ton. I hope you learned a ton. I hope you have a better understanding of what's going on in America. But what I really liked is that it ended on a positive note in terms of what we need to do in the future. We have the vision of unity. That vision was created in the civil rights movement. Now we need to just come together as human beings and put aside our skin color differences and just treat everyone equally. To me, that seems not controversial. Let me know what you think. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow. Please leave us a review. It really helps a lot. Until next time, thank you.